Hi, my name is Nick. I'm the founder and director of Functional Neurohealth. I'm a functional neurology practitioner, and I posted last week for the first time in a long time. And what I talked about in that show was just a little bit more into my story, where I've come from, why I got to this position that I'm in now, and what I want to do moving forward with this channel. Spent a lot of time building up an audience on Instagram, and now I want to focus on YouTube and seeing how much I can offer on this channel in different aspects of health and wellness and the brain, nervous system that I can share on to help you. And or if you wanted to learn from me, this is also a way for you to connect with my ideas and what I do. I went into the background of the journey that I went on from leaving the military to studying health and fitness and eventually falling down the road of neurology and the nervous system, and how that's super, super important. And that it wasn't initially something that I set out to do because I thought that's the cool thing to do, although it's a bit of a hip thing these days. There's reasons as to why, and it's all about efficiency and pragmatism. I'm all about what gets the result, what is going to help my clients and myself get to their optimum health as quickly as possible. So that's why we go to the nervous system. Now, with the nervous system itself, there are a lot of things, a lot of different approaches that you could be looking after. What I mean by that is, there are many different ways to look at the nervous system, and especially with the online scene at the moment, there are lots of fads coming out and everyone's saying that they're working with the nervous system, and it's great. We've got so much awareness. But what I see a lot is that, and this happens in any field, but in particular in the field of health and medicine, is because the human body is the most complex organism on the earth, as far as I know, as far as we can see. And we have this way as human beings with our mind, which is built up from a bunch of programs that we've developed over a long period of time since birth. This is something that we're going to go very deep into moving forward. We're going to look at conditioning and programming. What we tend to do is we tend to simplify the complex and overcomplicate the simple. And what I mean by that and how that would play out is, for instance, everyone has nervous system dysregulation these days, and I would agree with that. But there's a whole camp of people saying it's all to do with the vagus nerve, and it's all to do with this, or it's all to do with that. And there's cases where that would absolutely be true, but nothing is that simple when it comes to the body, and in particular when it comes to the nervous system. And what I mean by that is, for our conscious mind, which is only 5% of what we have available of our bandwidth, for our conscious mind to figure out the most complex system in the body, we can't do it. But the brain itself, the nervous system itself, is like an AI system. It's a self-learning, continually adapting system, and it always is evolving. And when it gets a certain stimulus, a positive stimulus, which is a safe stimulus, it calms and integrates the entire body. And also the inverse happens when there is a threatening stimulus into the nervous system through any of the special senses or even through the emotional system. Then there will be an appropriate response towards that, which will be fight, flight, freeze, shut down, immobilization, vegetation, primarily reflexive responses. We cannot override them. Okay, we cannot override those responses. When we think about the nervous system, the brain, we often think we have so much more conscious control than we actually do. We generally only have awareness of around 40 bits of information, but it's said that the subconscious mind, which is embedded within the autonomic nervous system, has access to around 11 million bits of information per second. In the work that I do in functional neurology, we try and tap into the vast processing power of the subconscious mind and brain and leverage that power to correct the body and the mind. This may seem quite abstract to you. If you have not heard this before, it may even seem a bit woo-woo and a bit out there. And you know what? I can understand that because I've been in that position. And when I was first exposed to these concepts, I thought the exact same thing. However, there is a lot of science to it as well, and there are a lot of known pathways, but the organization of how our brain organizes itself in both a positive and negative sense is so far beyond our conscious mind, 40 bits of information per second brain can handle or tolerate. What do we need to do when we're trying to address someone's nervous system? In my system, in the system that I put together over essentially 15 years of practice and study and lots of learning, is I try to think less like myself, because myself, when I'm saying that, I'm talking about conscious mind. And I try to think about how a brain works. So thinking like how a brain would work. And if we think most functions in the human nervous system are reflexive in nature, then, which means non-conscious and just acting on impulses. The first bunch of reflexes that a human being has is something called the primitive reflexes. You may have heard of this or you might not have. And what they are essential, our base level programs that we have loaded on to our brain within our brainstem that start to fire up when we're born. We don't have any conscious control. We can't control any sort of movement at all. We'll flop around a bit. We can't walk, can't crawl. But these reflexes, such as the sucking reflex, which is the one that initiates head turning and then your ability to suck on mama's nipple to start to feed, that's a reflex. There's also the startle response, which is called the Moro reflex as well. And that's why often babies have to be wrapped up, because if they're not wrapped up, what actually happens if there's an unexpected stimulus, whether that's a sound coming in or maybe they moved quickly, then before they've had any conscious awareness of it, this Moro reflex, which is like a startle response, is initiated and their hands fly up like that. So I think we wrap them up because for the first 2 to 4 months, this wrapping makes that part of the brain feel safe. So these are all survival reflexes in a time of our life where we're pre-verbal, we're completely reliant on other, so we're extremely vulnerable. Think about that from a brain perspective. Think about how the brain, how it would be perceiving the world. Would it be safe? No. So these reflexes are all there, and they're gross motor programs. So massive, they're not fine motor patterns like this, they're gross motor programs. And they're there to obviously firstly keep us alive and safe. And then once they start to mature, then they are inhibited by the nervous system automatically. And then the next reflex appears, like postural reflex, like head riding and tilting, crawling, rocking. And then all of it's about getting us to move, because we know motor development goes hand in hand with cognitive and neurological development. And so delays in any one of them can affect any one of those other pathways or functions. So we start with these primitive reflexes, and they mature and they mature and they mature. Now, these primitive reflexes are considered like the brain's safe mode, meaning that even if we inhibit the reflexes from birth, and they inhibit normally, they switch off at 2 to 4 months old, what can sometimes happen is years later, even as an adult, 20 years later, we can have a big trauma, whether that's a physical trauma or an emotional trauma, that is sufficient enough for your brain to grab this reflex and turn it back on again. And when one of those primal reflexes, like the fear paralysis reflex or the Moro reflex, start to switch on again, then your neurology almost gets wound back to an infant. This is where we get responses, such in cases of anxiety, ADHD, things like that, which are inappropriate based on the stimuli that's happening around them. And this often creates confusion and further overwhelm because we're trying to place, why am I so wired up? Why am I like this? What's actually happening here? This is a reflexive response, and usually some of those retained primitive reflexes have switched back on. Why is that important? Because was previously thought that these reflexes generally, they get assessed by the doctor at the hospital, basically making sure that these reflexes are on for your child. If you've had kids, you'll understand this. And then from there, that was okay, that reflexes are fine. But recent developments in functional neurology and from other people such as Sally Goddard, who looked into reflexes, learning and behavior, has shown that not only do kids have developmental delays where those reflexes never inhibited, but we have many adults who never inhibited those reflexes. And through my work and other neurological practitioners' work, but what we've found is that many times kids can have a normal childhood, and as an adult, things can happen and these reflexes turn back on. Because remember, they are the safe mode of the nervous system. They're the safe mode of the nervous system. What are the implications of that? As we just mentioned, we have now, it's a trigger into a shutdown and mobilization, which is you can't move. That's more the fear paralysis reflex, or more sympathetic, like always on mode. That is the startle and the Moro reflex. What we have found is that around 80%, and this is anecdotal clinical evidence through myself, my practitioners and other practitioners, other similar modalities, it seems somewhere around 70 to 80%, maybe more, of adults that are suffering from chronic pain, anxiety, trauma, depression, PTSD, post-concussion, things like that, dysautonomia, functional neurological disorder, all these things. People who have that also almost always have some of these retained primitive reflexes, like the fear paralysis reflex, startle, or the Moro reflex. There's a whole bunch of other reflexes we're going to talk about at other times. We're just talking about those major ones at the beginning. And they're like, thinking of these reflexes are like the absolute base level. So if you're a 40-year-old adult and you have a reflex which should have been switched off at birth or just after birth, and that's now directing your entire neurological response to the world, and then you're having to compensate for that by creating a personality around that. I understand this is a lot of information to take on, but this is how it works. This is how it works, and this is what we see. And so I spend a lot of my time with a lot of my clients in those initial sessions switching off these reflexes. And because they're a reflex, anything that's a reflex, because it's so fast acting, if it can switch on fast, it can also switch off at the exact same speed. Many people think that's impossible. It's not. We see it every single day. My practitioners see it every single day. It is possible to turn these things off very quickly. We have an approach and a system that does that. We start there, and then we start to move down the neurological hierarchy. And guess what? People start feeling better very quickly, sometimes within the session, within a few sessions. Sometimes it takes longer, depends on the client, but often it's way faster than you think. So why am I saying this? Because there's so much information out in the world now about nervous system, do this, sunlight, ice baths, things like that, vagus nerve stimulation. They're all great, but they're all generalized approaches. And how do you know with each individual, how do you know whether that approach works for you or which combination works for you? Let's start at the base level and let's see if any of these base level programs, in the example I'm using today is these primitive reflex. Let's see if any of these base level programs are actually active. And if they are, let's turn them off. So that gives us a better chance when we go to do the ice bath, the vagus nerve stim, the earthing, the breath work, the meditation, the nutritional therapy, whatever it is. All those things are going to start to hold better once we have a safer nervous system. That means it's not necessarily what's going on around, but the nervous system itself, that subconscious reflexive nervous system, which is always about looking out to the outside to see if it's actually safe. Does it feel safe from within and from without? when it does, those things, which all work, they all work. I'm not saying one's better than the other, because any one of them could be an amazing thing for you to balance your nervous system or your client's nervous system. They're all going to work, but maybe we need to clear these higher level layers first, which are the primitive reflexes. And then we have a bunch of other ones that we're going to go through as we go along. But I thought I'm just going to start with that there, because that, for a lot of people still don't know this stuff. And maybe a lot of people are aware of it, but they don't know how fast it can change. Because one of the sayings that I stole off Dr. Eric Cobb from Z Health is, change happens at the speed of the nervous system, which is like that. So if we do something that the brain likes, it will show us quick, fast, and in a hurry, we'll feel better. If we do something that the brain doesn't like, it will show us quick, fast, and in a hurry, we'll feel worse. If we do something that is more neutral, doesn't really have an effect either way, we probably won't feel anything. We need to update, generally, in the general consensus, we need to update how the body actually works, because it's way past where we think, knowing that often it takes 30 years for what we're seeing in the research and the clinical research to hit the general public. Now with platforms like this, YouTube and all the social media, there's a lot of bad information out there, but there's also a lot of good information if you know what to look for. Okay, this today was first to educate and show that we need to start at the right level of the nervous system in order to get the results that we know is possible, which is very fast results. And it's also to give you some hope that there are solutions out there, whether it's through me, whether it's through one of my practitioners. We've got people in Australia and different countries, France, UK, America right now. But there are solutions there, and there are people that know what they're doing. And where we're going, it's going to be a completely different landscape from before. I hope that helps you. I hope that gives you a bit of insight. If you have any questions about what I was talking about, leave them below. I'll gladly answer them when I get the time. And I look forward to sharing more of this as we move forward. Thank you. Have a great day.